Hello. This time together, I think, is going to be much shorter on the topic of, is runaway population growth our world's biggest problem by far? And I'm just going to throw out some thoughts here that I've had, looking on so many issues that I've been looking at over the years and struggles I've had personally, and those of friends of mine, relatives, etc. And always, it seems like in our society, and what comes from our, quote, trained experts, is that we have so many issues, there's so many problems in this world. But what if so many of them are generated in the last couple hundred years and are greatly accelerating? That is all under the rubric or larger framework of the problem of overpopulation and runaway population growth, such that unless we start to look at this question much more and hopefully get a handle on it, things are going to run amok here completely. Now, I know, for instance, back in the 80s, there was a psychoanalyst, Rollo May, who specialized a lot on the topic of anxiety, wrote a lot on it. And he himself was a highly anxious person. And one of the points I suppose we've moved on to some other issues that we consider of greater importance, or that are of importance because nuclear war is a little less likely, arguably, with fewer weapons perhaps, but at any rate, issues like the environment, global warming in particular, and of course rising sea levels not being a small issue either. For instance, Al Gore came out with 2 movies on global warming. And while different people of different political persuasions have different views, and for often not necessarily scientifically different reasons, but just by way of different outlooks on how one acquires knowledge, whether in college or not, say, or other factors too. But at any rate, we're no farther ahead in some ways on whether there is even global warming or not. So I bring this up as a problem that we're looking at now. Of course, we're running out of resources, key resources too, and arguably there are many diseases still, some not, problems with poverty as relating to getting enough food too. And clean water, of course, is no small sneezing matter too, of course, and vast areas of certain huge population-citied people in Brazil, for instance, packed in very tightly. Not to say this doesn't happen in New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago too, amongst many other urban areas in the U.S. But again, many issues, of course, but what is the overwhelming driving issue, perhaps? Is it possibly population growth? And I'm not just talking in certain countries more than others, but even in our own, whereby perhaps several hundred years ago, there was a push from the eastern seaboard to move out west. And you could say in some respects due to overpopulation there, or at least being more crowded than some people liked. This in addition to factors like the desire for adventure as a frontiersman, or the hope of riches found somewhere else, or better land, or less exhausted land, say. But at any rate, again, I would venture to say that is this question of overpopulation and runaway population growth the biggest 10-ton elephant in the room that is not getting addressed for certain reasons. Basically that it's so hard to control population growth and for a variety of reasons again. So, is this the 10-ton elephant in the room then, as opposed to matters of the environment, so to speak, or not enough clean water, not enough good food, and rising carbon dioxide levels and rising ocean levels, this kind of matter? Should we, for the long term, be taking a closer and closer and more concerted view at overpopulation? For instance, one man has written a book, I don't remember the exact title or name, Ken Iglesias perhaps, on roaming, what we used to be able to do in America, roam, without legal sanctions, and how this is still permitted in some countries overseas or in many parts of the world to roam without being charged with violations of land boundaries. He was once some kind of official ranger or something in Alaska in the bush, and wrote several books on this and other related topics. But anyway, at one point in his book, he said several years ago that 60, was it by 2060 we would have 60 million people more in this country. So we can mince about the exact figures, but the point being in general that even in our own country, which has moderate growth compared to some, we would possibly have 60 million more people or so. And where are these people then supposed to go? Of course. Now, some would say there's plenty of rural land available still, but how many people want to live in the rural areas for the matters of lack of the type of employment they want at the income level they want, and of the nature of the jobs involved, and what kind of medical care, etc., etc., and entertainment availability? How many people want to go, for instance, to Appalachia or the Plains states to live when we have more and more population growth, yet 60 million more people? And then if you look at this throughout the whole world, this kind of growth, and call it runaway growth perhaps, where will it end? Well, I don't see very much material talking about this. I see a lot of talk about other things, once nuclear war possibility, and say the environment, clean water, and enough food, but and to the income disparity, especially in this country. But where is the talk about overpopulation? Where's the talk of too many people already, and the portent of more yet, in runaway fashion, in fact? I would say that while I'm not alarmed, because in general I'm not a catastrophizer, that doesn't mean I'm not somewhat concerned, shall we say, that this is the 10-ton elephant in the room, as I would say, and deserves more mention and consideration than we are looking at. Maybe some people feel it's too frightening to look at. Maybe they catastrophize both death and even the end of life as we know it on Earth so much that maybe that's one reason why we're not addressing this. And of course there being other constraints too, like how one views life in terms of one's religion or not, and constraining factors there. And whether this impinges on rights of freedom for a government to start to say how many children we can have, or what can and can't be done to achieve that, and how this was done once in China, and how that panned out, and whether it was even possible to constrain children and growth by way of decreeing in China at one time that you can only have one child per family. Whether that even happened much, in fact, and how that all panned out, and how it was made to happen. So I just bring all this up in whirlwind fashion to put out my view that, again, Well, topics of the environment, and once the topic of nuclear war, and all these concerns are fine and grand. What about this topic of what will happen if we not only don't get our population growth under control, but in fact somehow perhaps try and strive to reduce the population level? Now, of course, that would probably be quite impossible other than from some catastrophic pandemic or impact from a meteor from outer space. But at any rate, even if there are no solutions, wouldn't it be nice if we considered this topic somewhat more than we presently do? Maybe it's quite unsolvable. But then, if it's unsolvable, how are we dealing with this emotionally? Are we catastrophizing the possible end of our species or not? And maybe we should be doubling down then on Elon Musk's solution of going to Mars and starting over, perhaps. And maybe redoubling our view of what Stephen Hawking once said, that astrophysicist, that if we don't get our act together, that within 1,000 years things will be over on Earth. And maybe he would have been backing Elon Musk's solution that our situation is perhaps impossible and we need to repopulate somewhere else. At any rate, there being no short-term solutions, surely, no magic bullet, no special pill we can take. Maybe we need to just buckle down and say this is a very important issue and deserves much more attention than we're giving it. And how are we going to solve this? If it can be solved other than going to another planet or the outer space realm. Finally, what are the spiritual solutions or the psychological solutions in terms of coping with this whole fiasco, if you will, by at least starting off by not catastrophizing what could happen, because that does no good at all, just generates panic. You might even call paranoia of a sort, although I don't like to use that word, paranoia. A more measured, calmer approach at any rate is better in fashion. So I bring this out for consideration, just to remind myself perhaps, to clarify my own thinking, and hopefully it's a little helpful to anyone who stumbles across this. I wish you well.